Chapter 1. The Mouth That Should Have Burned Clean. A child opened his mouth in a dark room, and the walls answered, not with echo, with fire. In the book of Isaiah, the Seraphim stand above the divine throne, 6 wings, a cry so powerful it shakes the foundations of the temple. And in one impossible moment, one of them takes a live coal from the altar and presses it against a human mouth. The prophet survives. That is where every theologian stops. A purification. At the moment, holy fire touches a mortal and leaves him alive. But there is a question no one asks. What happens when a human being, obsessed, starving, proud, decides to reach upward and take that fire for himself? Not as a vision, not as a gift, but into his blood, into his children, into every generation that follows. Because this is not a story about demons. It is a story about what happens when a family reaches toward something too holy to survive, and something answers. Chapter 2. The Family That Asked for a Seraph. Long before the child with the shaking voice, there was a man who feared his own mouth. He was a copyist, a recorder of sacred words. A man who spent his life repeating warnings that others had received directly from God, while secretly starving to hear something himself. He did not want wisdom. He did not want comfort. He wanted a mouth so pure that no lie could survive inside it, a tongue so refined that heaven itself would speak through it. And that hunger became the first mistake. He found the vision in fragments, not just the throne, not just the smoke, but the detail that changed everything. A seraph took burning coal to human lips, and the human did not die. So he asked the forbidden question: if a prophet could endure that fire, could a priestly bloodline be remade by it? He searched the old wilderness texts and found something stranger still. The very word bound to the seraphim above the throne is also connected to the fiery serpents in the desert wilderness, and to Isaiah's image of a flying, fiery serpent. That changed everything. Because now the holy ones above the throne no longer looked soft, they looked burning, winged, dangerous, close to judgment, close to venom, close to the part of heaven that does not descend to comfort, but to purify by force. The man did what obsessed men always do when heaven stays silent. He stopped sleeping. He sealed his windows. He copied the word holy until it stopped looking like language and began to look like teeth. Holy, holy, holy. He built no idol. He called no demon. That was the horror of it. He still believed he was serving God. In a hidden chamber beneath his house, he constructed a false altar. Stone, ash, bronze tools shaped after temple descriptions, a basin of water, a pair of tongs. He had no coal from heaven, so he made his own. He burned cedar until the chamber filled with sweet smoke. He mixed ash with oil. He drew blood from his palm and marked the stone altar's edge. Then he spoke the words no human being should ever speak as an invitation, not to evil, to purity, to the fire that belongs only to the throne. Nothing answered at first. That almost saved him. But obsession is easiest to mistake for devotion when heaven is silent. So he returned the next night, and the next, and on the 7th, the chamber changed. The smoke stopped rising. It hung in the air like a curtain that had always been there. The coals brightened without breath, and from somewhere above him, from somewhere that should not have been above him, came a sound like many voices saying the same word at once. He fell forward. He wept. He believed he had succeeded. Then something touched his mouth. Not with hands, not with mercy. With heat so complete it erased every other sensation. When he woke, he could still speak. That was the second mistake. Because the fire had not cleansed him, it had recognized him. He climbed out of the chamber pale and silent, and unable to lie. His wife asked what had happened below the house. He opened his mouth to protect her, and blood appeared at his gums. He told her the truth instead. After that night, the family was never the same. No child in that line slept without trembling. No room stayed warm for long. Smoke gathered in sealed houses. Infants stared into empty corners and smiled, as if listening to something no one else could hear. And in every generation, one child was born with what the family began to call the marked mouth, dry lips at birth, night terrors before they could walk, a voice that sometimes returned heavier, layered with something older than any child's body should be able to carry. They were not possessed. That would have been simpler. They were inherited, and the curse did not ask whether they believed in it. It only asked whether the blood still remembered the fire. Chapter 3. The First False Cleansing. The first time they tried to break it, the boy they chose was 9 years old. His name was Asael, too young to understand why adults whispered when he entered a room, too young to know why his grandmother wept whenever he sang. He had already begun waking with ash on his lips, already begun repeating fragments from dreams he could never describe, already begun staring at the ceiling during storms, waiting, it seemed, for someone to descend. So the family did what cursed families always do when faith and panic become the same thing. They imitated the origin of the wound. They rebuilt the chamber. They lit the coals. They wrapped the child in linen. They told him this was for cleansing. When the smoke thickened, he smiled, not from comfort, from recognition. He said he had been there before, not in that room. Higher. His eyes fixed on a point above all of them. His mouth opened, and the sound that came out struck the walls hard enough to shake dust from the beams overhead. A lamp burst. A woman near the doorway fell to her knees and pressed her palms to her ears. And Asael, still sitting upright in the smoke, began to laugh through a voice no 9-year-old should possess. Then he spoke the words that ended any hope this was mercy. You cannot steal what only descends. The coal they had prepared rolled from the tongs before anyone moved. It struck the floor, split in two, each half burned with a white center, the color no earthly ember produces. When they pulled the child from the chamber, his skin was unmarked. Only his mouth bore what had passed through him. Across his lower lip, a thin dark line, as if something had pressed a blade of fire against the skin for one instant and then withdrawn. From that night forward, every marked child in the bloodline bore the same seal. Not a wound, a claim. The elders finally understood what they had done. The first man had not brought seraphic fire into the bloodline as a blessing. He had taught the bloodline how to be found. Chapter 4. When the house learns your name. After Asael, the family stopped asking whether the curse was real. The question had become worse. What did it want? They began keeping records. Not scripture now. Case histories, dates, ages, symptoms, transcriptions of impossible speech, descriptions of smoke patterns, measurements of tremors in door frames. Every generation added pages. Every generation sounded less sane. Every generation sounded more certain. The curse always moved through the mouth. Never the hand first. Never the eye first. The mouth. Children bit their tongues in sleep until the pillow bore traces of iron. Adults who carried lesser traces lost the ability to speak false comfort over the dying. Some became incapable of flattery. Some went silent for weeks. Some, forced to swear an oath they did not mean, felt their throats close, as if a hand of heat had entered from within. The family named it the Law of the Burning Mouth, and the house changed with the speaker. At the first stage, the wood creaked in answer to the marked child's voice. At the second, windows filmed from the inside with gray haze. At the third, smoke gathered in corners, not rising from below, but descending from above. At the fourth, the thresholds shook. Always the thresholds, as if the curse remembered the architecture of Isaiah's vision and was attempting to rebuild it inside ordinary homes. The family sought scholars. One old scribe offered the most terrifying interpretation of all. The line was not cursed by a seraph. It was cursed by imitation, because imitation means intention. It means the original sin of the bloodline was not accidental contact. It was desire. Desire to speak with a purer mouth than other men, To be nearer to judgment than other men, to become a vessel. The family hated that answer. Because demons can be resisted, disease can be treated, but hunger for holiness twisted into pride, that lives inside the victim. Still, desperation kept breeding new experiments. Some tried silence, withholding language from the marked children for days, hoping the curse could not pass through a mouth denied all words. The children still woke, whispering. Some tried filling the silence with song. The marked voices only harmonized until the other singers fled in terror. Then, someone returned to the wilderness texts and found a possible countersymbol. The fiery serpents that struck the people in the desert, and the bronze serpent that once stood between venom and death. Perhaps the same symbol could interrupt the pattern. They forged a bronze serpent. Not as an idol, they insisted, as a remedy, a mirror to redirect the burning. They placed it above the chamber entrance. They anointed it. They recited mercy psalms beneath it for 30 days. For 1 month, the house went still. No ash smell, no voices, no trembling wood. The family believed they had finally outmaneuvered the curse. Then, the marked girl of that generation, a child named Tirzah, looked up at the bronze figure and began to scream, not from fear, from recognition. She said it was not keeping anything out. It was showing the fire where to enter. That same night, every vessel of water in the house turned black with soot. At dawn, they found words scorched across the inside of the chamber wall. 3 lines, 3 identical words. Holy, holy, holy. No one admitted writing them. No one had to. By then, the curse no longer needed secrecy to terrify them. It needed pattern, because pattern proves design, and design means something is still participating. Tirzah's progression advanced faster than any heir before her. She no longer whispered in sleep. She spoke in full sentences to an unseen presence. She answered questions no one had asked aloud. She flinched at deceptions before they were spoken. Once, during a meal, her father said that everything would be fine. She turned toward him with tears already forming, and spoke in that impossible layered voice. Do not use your mouth for what the fire will not allow. He could not speak for 2 full days afterward, not by choice, because whenever he tried, his throat filled with the taste of ash. The house had become a chapel of correction, a place where language itself was under watch. Chapter 5. The night the ceiling sang back. Tirzah was 12 when they performed the last great ritual, not to cleanse her, to force an answer. They sealed the chamber with wax and linen. They removed every mirror. They hung the bronze serpent upside down above the entrance, hoping reversal might break the design. They placed no false coal on the altar this time. Only ash, only emptiness, only confession. Then her grandfather did something no one in the bloodline had done before. He told the truth. He said the curse began because their ancestor wanted a prophet's mouth without a prophet's calling. He said they had all been punished for keeping that ambition alive in secret. He said if judgment wanted a mouth, let it take his instead. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Tirzah looked up. The ceiling above her darkened, not with shadow, but with depth, as if the room had opened into a height the house could not contain. Smoke poured downward, not choking, descending. The walls began to vibrate. The vibration deepened into a chord. The chord separated into voices, not one choir, but many. Layered so tightly they sounded like a single vast creature assembled from praise and flame. Every threshold in the house shook at once. Doors flew open on the floor above them. The chamber stones split with hairline fractures directly beneath their feet, and Tirzah rose, without seeming to feel her own body, and spoke with a calm more frightening than any sound she had made before. He invited the fire to enter the blood. The blood accepted, the mouth remembers. Her grandfather stepped toward her. He could not. The air between them had turned hot enough to distort his vision at the edges. Then she spoke the sentence that finally broke the family's last illusion. This was never a haunting. She turned toward the empty altar. It was breeding. No one forgot that word. Not because it was loud, because it was exact. Generations of correction. Generations of pressure. Generations of speech stripped down, narrowed, and purified. Not random torment. Selection. Then, Tirzah began describing the first ancestor's chamber as if she had stood inside it herself. The stone, the tongs, the self-made coal, the blood on the altar edge. The exact prayer the man had spoken when he asked for a mouth that heaven would not refuse. No surviving record contained that full prayer. It had been destroyed 2 generations earlier. She recited it flawlessly, until her mother screamed for her to stop. The voices in the ceiling went silent with her. So did the shaking. So did the heat. And in the silence that followed, the family finally understood what had been passed down through every generation. Not just a curse, memory. The fire had been teaching the bloodline to remember the invitation, waiting for one heir strong enough to repeat it perfectly. Chapter 6. The Last Heir and the Opened Mouth. After Tirzah, the bloodline scattered. Some changed continents, some changed faiths. Some refused to have children. Some never spoke of the curse except in locked rooms and unfinished letters. It did not matter. The fire traveled more faithfully than surnames. By the time the last known heir was born, the line had been reduced to fragments. A grandmother who kept ash sealed in a silver box. A father who never raised his voice because the walls always answered. A mother who taught her child never to repeat words heard half asleep, and a house built far from old chambers, old altars, and old texts, as if distance could confuse something that moved through blood. The child's name was Miriam. For 13 years, nothing happened. That was the cruelest mercy the curse had ever offered. Long enough for her parents to hope. Long enough for ordinary life to take root. Long enough for birthdays, laughter, school books, and the small soft lies families tell each other when the truth is too heavy. Then one winter night the power failed. Not just in the house. Across the entire road, the rooms went dark, and from the kitchen came a whisper. Not hers, not anyone's. A whisper already in progress, as if the house had been speaking long before the humans noticed. Miriam went to the doorway, stopped, and asked the question every marked child eventually asks. Why is someone singing inside the walls? After that, the stages moved quickly. Ash smell, sleeplessness, murmured phrases at odd hours. A growing inability to tolerate false reassurance. When her mother said, "It's only stress," every glass in the kitchen cracked at once. When her father said, "You're safe here," the hallway filled with smoke for the first time in 20 years. Miriam was not merely hearing the voices. She was correcting the house into their image. And unlike Asael, unlike Tirzah, she asked questions. Who are they? Why me? What do they want? Said. Those questions terrified the adults more than any manifestation, because curiosity had been how it began the first time. The family opened the sealed records. At the bottom of a box wrapped in linen and wax, they found one surviving page from the destroyed prayer. Most of it was ash. One sentence remained. "Let my mouth bear what fire bears." Miriam read it once and nearly fainted. Read it twice and the room grew hot. Read it a third time, and every smoke alarm in the house screamed together, though no flame could be found anywhere. They understood then what the curse had always been building toward. Not a death, a repetition. The final heir would not simply suffer the line. She would choose whether to renew it. That made the curse more monstrous than any demon could manage. Because hereditary horror is terrible, but hereditary horror that waits for consent, that feels intelligent. Miriam found the buried chamber remains 3 weeks later, beneath the oldest surviving family house. No one had shown her the way. No one had described the route. She walked the buried corridor as if led by something she could not name. At the end stood only collapsed stone, rusted metal, and a blackened circle where the altar had been. She entered alone, and for the first time in the bloodline's history, the voices went silent before the ritual began. That silence frightened her more than the singing, because silence from something ancient can mean only one thing above all others: attention. Chapter 7. When the fire finally spoke. She understood in that moment what every other heir had missed. The curse had always fed on imitation. False coals, false altars, false attempts to command holy fire with human hands. That was why nothing had ever worked. The bloodline kept trying to control what could only descend freely. The first sin had not been contact. It had been theft. So Miriam made the one decision no ancestor had ever made. She would not invite, she would not imitate, she would not ask for the mouth. If the fire wanted speech, it would have to reveal itself as what it truly was: judgment, or only the long echo of old human pride. The chamber changed the moment she chose silence. No chant, no false coal, no blood on stone, only refusal. The darkness above the ruined altar deepened into height, as if the buried room had opened upward into something vast and close. Smoke descended in slow folds. The cracked walls began to vibrate, not violently, but with precision, like an instrument being tuned for a note too pure for flesh to absorb. Miriam felt heat gather around her mouth. She did not open it. The voices returned, not outside her now, inside the architecture of her own breathing. Holy, holy, holy. Each repetition pressed harder against her teeth. Each one felt less like sound and more like pressure, demanding a form it could occupy. The floor trembled beneath her. The old thresholds answered from across the ruins. For one impossible moment, the buried chamber and the throne room pattern touched. Smoke, shaking stone, burning presence, and a mortal mouth at the center of it all. Then she saw them, not fully. No human story survives that intact, only fragments. Edges of wings folded over brightness. Motion like flame, choosing a shape for one instant and releasing it the next. Not soft, not decorative. Severe, attentive. Terrible the way perfect things become terrible when they stand too close to the impure. The heat gathered at her lips, stronger, sharper, until it felt exactly like a coal not yet touching, but deciding. She understood then the final truth of her bloodline. The curse had never been a seraph trapped in human flesh. It had been the consequence of a family that taught itself to counterfeit purification. Generation after generation, the imitation called down pressure, memory, and correction. The fire did not belong to them, but their repeated reaching gave it a path. And because that path had been built through blood and speech, every descendant had been born inside the unfinished sentence of the first man's pride. Miriam began to cry, not from pain, from clarity. For the first time, the fire did not feel hungry. It felt judicial, as if the entire bloodline had been dragged across centuries to this single point, for one decision. Repeat the invitation or end the imitation. The pressure inside her mouth became unbearable. Her jaw trembled. A voice layered and immense formed just beneath speech. Not commanding, waiting. That was the mercy. A narrow one, but real. So Miriam did the one thing the first ancestor never could. She refused to steal holiness. She refused to turn her mouth into a ladder. She refused to beg for fire to belong to flesh. And instead of the forbidden prayer, she spoke only one truth. Not mine. The chamber convulsed. Smoke tore upward through stone. The heat struck her lips like a line of white fire and vanished. The voices broke apart, not in anger, in release. Stone cracked. The bronze remnants split clean down the center. In the family's archive miles away, surviving pages darkened at their edges at the exact same moment. And in house after house, across the last scattered fragments of the bloodline, people woke choking on ash that was no longer there. Then, silence. Real silence, not the waiting kind. The emptied kind. The kind that leaves a room feeling suddenly, completely human again. When they found Miriam at dawn, she was alive, weak, shaking. unable to speak above a whisper. Across her lower lip lay the old dark mark every heir had borne, but now it was broken in the center, a severed seal. The family called it deliverance. Some called it atonement. Some called it proof that the fire had finally withdrawn. But one detail keeps this story from ending cleanly. For months afterward, Miriam could not lie, not even once, not even gently. And when strangers spoke false promises near her, the air around the nearest doorframe gave a soft, answering creak, as if something had left the bloodline, but not the world. Because perhaps the most terrifying possibility is not that the curse survived in one family. It is that the pattern still exists. That, somewhere, even now, another human being is staring into sacred text with proud and starving eyes. That somewhere, someone is asking for a mouth too pure for mercy. And if they ask long enough, the smoke may descend again. So tell me this, if a human mouth was never meant to hold stolen holiness, was Miriam's bloodline punished or protected from becoming something far worse? And if you had heard that voice inside the walls, would you have tried to cleanse the curse or sealed the chamber and never spoken again? Drop your answer below. Subscribe to Monster Mythos. Because the deeper you go into sacred horror, the less certain it becomes that evil is the only thing humans were ever warned not to touch.